Okay, we are back with our second presentation of the evening. Our ID24 is just flying by. Once again, my name is Billy Gregory. I'm here with Leonie Watson. We just want to remind you that if you do like these sessions, please hit that the publish button, or sorry, the subscribe button for the ID24 channel. We've got lots of great ideas and future events coming up, so we'd love you to stay tuned.
Absolutely, and we're actually not alone for this hour, as well as everybody who's participating from different parts of the world. The Centre for Inclusive Design in Sydney are having an in-person gathering to stream the first handful of talks from ID24. So hello to everybody out there in Sydney. Hope you're having a good time and enjoying yourself with some food and drink while you're watching ID24.
Once again,
a quick reminder.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry,
I was going to say a quick reminder that every hour we're giving away a 90-day JAWS license to help with that accessibility testing that many of us do. So we'll be watching out for really interesting or innovative tweets, or somebody giving us a lot of ID24 support on Twitter or other channels. So yeah, we'll be watching out, and we'll announce the winner of this hour's license at the end of this talk. Billy.
Right. And speaking of this talk, we now introduce you to Jesse Anderson, and he's here to give us an illegally cited look at VR accessibility. Jesse, welcome.
All right, thank you. So yeah, we can just get started here. Like you said, this talk is an illegally cited look at VR accessibility. We have a lot to dive into here, so we'll just dive right into it here. Introduction. A little bit of background about myself. I am legally blind myself, and so I've been using assistive technology pretty much all my life. I've worked as an assistive technology specialist, an assistive technology trainer, done a lot of different stuff like that. I've had, I have my bachelor's degree in information technology management and a master's in instructional design and technology. And my VR background, believe it or not, I actually got to see an early prototype of virtual reality in 1995, actually, at the University of Washington. And even in that early stage, I'm like, okay, this is really cool. This is going to go somewhere eventually. And it is starting to do so. I did get a chance to look at the Oculus Rift development kit a couple of years ago, because one of my early concerns was that I didn't even know if this VR thing is going to work for somebody with low vision, just because of, like text and distances and how things are away from your eye and everything. Thankfully, it worked out pretty good. I got really excited about it. Started looking at working with like Google Cardboard and some mobile VR stuff while waiting for the Oculus Rift to come out. And since the Rift and the Oculus Touch controllers, the motion controllers have come out, I've been using that and trying to get into more virtual reality accessibility. So here we go. Introduction to VR. Before we get into the accessibility stuff really quick, I want to mention just a few different types of, I guess I'll call them alternate realities. We have virtual reality, which is primarily what we're going to be talking about here. That is basically where you have a headset that you are kind of blocked off from the real world. You know, you're immersed in some experience, audibly, visually, that kind of a thing. Then you have things like augmented reality, which are, think about last year, the big craze for Pokemon Go. You know, you're basically bringing virtual like items or objects into the real world. Apple with its iOS 11 and Google starting to do it. They're kind of getting into augmented reality on smartphones and tablets. Then you have mixed reality. And mixed reality, we haven't really seen a lot from that yet. Microsoft is kind of starting to push it, although they're primarily still in VR as well. But this is kind of taking the combination of virtual reality and augmented reality and kind of using them together. So you might be in an experience that might also be kind of part of your real world. Then there's different levels of virtual reality that kind of refer to. So to start with, you have things like mobile VR. This is your Google Cardboard you may have heard of, or see commercials for the Gear VR, things like that, things that for your smartphone. They're lower cost, they work with smartphones, but they might not be as high fidelity. Then you have things like PC virtual reality. This is things like your really high-end, your Oculus Rift, HTC Vive. These are the full setups and the high-end right now. They're definitely more expensive, and they kind of require a more powerful computer to run. Console VR, this is like your PlayStation VR for PlayStation 4. That's also available right now. Standalone headsets, we don't have those just yet, but Oculus last month announced their Oculus Go, which is a standalone device. Basically, they're taking the processing power, so you don't have to connect it to your phone. You don't have to connect it to a computer, but everything is in the headset itself. So that's kind of right around the corner. And then mixed reality, I kind of talked about already, but we're not quite there yet. VR apps, I wanted to touch on this just really quickly because a lot of times, people think virtual reality, they think about kind of just way out there stuff or gaming, and gaming is definitely a part of it. But actually, one of the reasons that accessibility, I think, is so important in this is because you can actually do a lot with VR. So yes, you have games, and I have a few listed there. But then you also have education experiences. I've had some really cool experiences, like exploring the International Space Station, watching and kind of participating in a Apollo 11 VR documentary. Amazing stuff. Then you have entertainment. Let's say being able to attend a sports game or a concert in the best seats of the house, something like that. Simulations, like vehicle simulations, or even like people are starting to use it in the medical industry to practice, different type of medical procedures, those types of things. So, it's not just gaming. There's a lot of different applications and uses for it. So, we don't want to be left out with VR because of that, because of all these uses. So leads into my next slide here. Why accessibility? Well, there's a few reasons. Of course, the first one being it's just going to serve more people. Developers want as many people as they can to enjoy and use their products. They can sell more, they can make more money, that kind of thing too. And there are already some barriers to virtual reality and we don't want to add another one, being accessibility. So, we have some current, like I said, there are some current barriers, things like high cost. If you're looking at the PC or console side of things, several $100s plus the console or a high power PC to run everything. It's kind of technical in nature still. Everyone is still trying to figure it out. So there's, kind of some weirdness going on when you're trying to set things up, or little experiences like that. You kind of have to, there's a little bit of tinkering that you kind of have to do in these early stages. And then the play area or play space restriction, a lot of people, myself included, I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. I don't have a whole lot of room, or maybe even if you have a big house, you have a, big family. You especially if you're using motion control games in virtual reality, those kind of require a fair bit of space to really interact with the apps effectively. So those are some other kind of barriers that exist, and we don't want to have accessibility be a part of them. Another reason is that VR standards are really not set yet, and that's another kind of reason that I got into VR to begin with. Is cheap plug, I'll tell you at the end, but I've been doing a YouTube channel for a few years, and I've been actually getting into VR accessibility there. And so because the VR standards are not made yet, everyone is still trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. If I can get out there, or we can get out there and basically get these platform holders to acknowledge accessibility as just another piece, so they can be included into VR standards, that would be great, because we all know that bolting on accessibility later doesn't really work that well and isn't that effective. And finally, it's just the right thing to do. This is a really cool technology. We want people to use it, to enjoy it. Accessibility, access to VR for low vision. This is just a quick summary of kind of some of the things that we're going to be diving into. So things like head tracking, font and other UI, option screens outside of VR, locomotion, difficulty settings. Just these, we'll just kind of, because we'll just go into these in more detail here. So the first one, and one of the most, I think, important things that I've found as a low vision VR user is head tracking in a virtual reality experience from start to close of app. This is really important. What I mean by head tracking is on a console or PC virtual reality headset, you have the cameras that track not only your headset, but if you're using motion controllers, those as well in 3D space. Now, mobile VR does not have this right now. They're working on some kind of a solution for inside the headset called inside out tracking, but we're not there yet. But for the ones that do have head tracking, you have cameras either in front of you or all around you to track yourself. And if you have head tracking, what that allows is a low vision user could lean in or move closer toward text or UI element or something in the experience or environment, and they were able to get closer to see it. And this is really critical because a lot of times what happens is they're in an experience, there may be pieces of it, like if you're in the actual environment itself, it supports head tracking pretty well. But you open up the main menu or the pause menu, or you get some sort of tutorial or some kind of message pops up, you can't read those because those, what they'll do is they'll have a fixed distance away from you. So they'll always like, oh, we want this to be virtually 3 feet in front of you. So if I lean forward, it pushes it back. If I lean backward, it comes toward me. So it's always that fixed distance away from you. There's also another feature that's really handy that ties in, being a recenter view button. A lot of the controller games, if you're just using like an Xbox One controller, which a lot of experiences support, or a PlayStation controller, they have a button that will basically recalibrate the center of your view. And when you combine that with head tracking, what that allows me to do is I'm in my play area and I want to be able to read something. I can move to the back of my play area, set that as my recenter, and then I can be able to move closer or move more forward in my play area to get closer to, a text or something in the environment, which is, I use that a lot actually. So it's very important to have that kind of combination. Unfortunately, motion control games really don't have that. I don't think I've seen a single title that has had that for like your motion controller style VR experiences. Here's an example. On the top, you have, this is kind of a title screen main menu for an early Oculus title called Crystal Rift. And the main menu, you're kind of zoomed out on the far end, but then if you're able to, recenter view and then lean in, you're actually leaning closer, just as if you were looking at like something pinned up on the wall. You can actually get closer to it. So that is really helpful, and not enough experiences actually support this for menus and option screens and stuff like that. Font size, face and color. So just like when designing for any type of technology, be it VR or the web or whatever, you want to have clear, large enough, clear fonts, avoid really heavily stylized fonts that are actually really tough to read. Sometimes like handwriting or like a really stylized script can be really hard to read. And having it good contrast with the background or the environment. So if you have a dialog box, or if you're overlaying the text over the environment, it's important to have good contrast there, because there's been a lot of titles where, depending on what I'm looking at, I kind of have to find an area in the environment as I'm looking around so that text will actually contrast with it well. And I reiterate here again, please, pretty please, include head tracking for things like menus, options, option screens, setting screens, tutorials, character stat screens, like if you're in an RPG or something, text tutorials. Text can be one of the hugest barriers to someone with low vision being able to actually navigate or use the experience. Other UI things to consider: it's also really nice to be able to have multiple means of communicating something. So if you're doing, let's say, a tutorial, having either text to speech or narrated, a narrated tutorial, like someone in the game or experience's context telling you how to move around or manipulate objects or just navigate the experience. Icons, buttons, and other UI elements, not just text. Again, you want to make sure there's good contrast, that everything is really large enough for people to see comfortably. And one thing I didn't even really mention so far is that there are a lot of people who wear glasses and maybe don't want to have them or wear them in VR. So, I've had several people try my Oculus Rift who wear glasses, and if the experience is done well enough, a lot of them can actually they can use the experience without glasses all the time, which can actually make it more comfortable. So it helps a lot more people if you think about it that way. Another UI thing that's really helpful is to add a crosshair if you're doing an experience like a ranged combat thing. So if you're playing with, like a gun or a bow and arrow, something like that, or even if you're using a pointer interface in a menu, having some kind of crosshair. So like on a flat screen game, like let's say a first-person shooter video game, you typically have a crosshair in the middle of the screen so you know what you're aiming at. But in virtual reality, they really have you hold the bow and arrow or the gun or weapon out in front of you. And if you're trying to aim at something at a distance, it's actually very difficult to do, because you have to aim down the sights, or, they're trying to make it realistic. So adding that option would be very helpful. Here's an example, little screenshot of a game. This is a freebie that came with the Oculus Touch motion controllers called Bullet Train. And it had a mechanic where basically you're using this, you can hold down a button, you aim this beam to teleport between set locations in the environment. But it had a side benefit of, it was this big glowy beam, and I found that if I held my virtual gun out in front of me, I could kind of use it as like a thick shiny laser pointer, and it was easier for me to aim at enemies and different things in the environment. So that was a really unintentional thing that was really kind of cool. Locomotion in VR. This is another thing that everyone's really trying to figure out right now. There are a lot of different ways that they're trying to figure out motion, like moving around in virtual reality, because what happens is some VR experiences more than others tend to or can cause motion sickness in a lot of people. And that's kind of due to the fact that, like, you're not moving, your body's not really moving much, but it really feels like you are, because you have that really sense of depth that you don't have in a flat screen experience. So there are a couple of different locomotion methods. There's teleport and free movement. And for teleporting, there are a couple of different types of that. You have fixed teleport, which is basically you're in a room, you have, let's say, 3 or 4 different little circles on the ground saying I can move here, here, or here. And then, of course, free teleport means if you have the same space, if there's open floor, I can teleport anywhere. Teleport is definitely more user-friendly to most people because it doesn't cause motion sickness as much. It's good for beginner users. Free movement, however, is a little bit more for advanced users, people who don't experience motion sickness. Thankfully, I do not, and I actually prefer free movement over teleport. I find teleporting to be kind of distracting, honestly, but I'm one of the weird ones out there. But I would say that free movement or free teleport, being able to teleport to any point in an area, in an environment, is really most helpful for low vision users, simply because if, let's say, you have a fixed few teleport points and I need to interact or read something or look at something in a space, if I'm only given like 3 sets places to stand, I might not be able to get close enough to that text or that object that I need to read or interact with. So being able to freely teleport or move around really helps a lot. There are some alternate motion, locomotion styles that people have experimented with, like gesture-based or walking in place. There is this medieval gladiator game that I was playing a little while back, where basically you had to move, you put your hands down at your side and you kind of moved your arms back and forth like you were walking or running really fast. It was kind of effective, but in a way it was kind of clunky because then you had to, manipulate your weapon and stuff too. But so everyone's still trying to figure that out. The important thing for locomotion, just like the head tracking and everything, include options and then let the user decide what works for them. Some people can't use free motion because it makes them motion sick. Some people really, really prefer full motion instead of teleport and find it a smoother experience, such as myself. So having those options can be really helpful. And then we have, like, in combination with movement, like head turning in VR. So you kind of combine that with movement. So there are a couple different methods for doing that. Like, I can physically turn my head, look left, right, up, down, and that's fine because that's natural. That's what everybody does. But then if you're, in a limited space, or you can't really do the full 360-degree movement, like my camera, I really can't because I have 2 front-facing cameras. So if I turn around, the space in the back of me, I may cut off. It won't track me properly. So in those cases, you can use different controller means to move you around. And they have like snap movement or free controller movement. And snap movement is where you're basically taking, when you move that like an analog stick on a controller, you'll move, it'll kind of snap 10, 20, 30 degrees at a time. So like snap left, right, 1, 2, 3, it'll just snap a little bit. And free turning, of course, is just where you smoothly turn around. So you combine free turning and free motion. That can make some people motion sick in virtual reality. So that some people really like it. I really like it. I find it really, really more immersive, but not everyone can handle that. So again, having those settings options really can help. Another thing that you can do, another thing that kind of helps reduce the motion sickness is, separating your head movement or actual movement from the actual how you're moving. So like if you're in a cockpit, like you're in a driver's seat of a car, or you're flying a plane or a spacecraft or something, your body doesn't expect you to be moving because you're sitting in a seat, but you're still moving. So then full motion doesn't really matter as much. But again, free movement or free teleport can really, I think, is the most helpful for low vision users. Settings outside of a VR app. This is something I stumbled onto a little ways into using VR. So, a lot of experiences may have some of these settings and customization options. But like I said, the problem is some of the main menus and option screens don't support head tracking. So even though the experiences might have them, it's very difficult, if not impossible sometimes, for me to access those, or someone with low vision to access those in that experience. So prior to opening a VR app, it would be a really handy thing to have like an optional setting screen that you could open, where you could customize anything from, you know, visual settings, audio settings, controller remapping, you know, movement style. Do you want teleport or free movement? You know, any kind of standard visual or VR specific settings. And that way, when you do that, a user could use their existing assistive technology to configure those. And once they get into the app, it'll be ready to go. You know, even not just low vision, but let's say somebody was unable to physically manipulate the controls in the default setup. So, you know, they wouldn't be able to do that in the app, but if they were able to customize it prior to it, it would actually work really well. I don't think any VR app that I've seen really has done this. Several flat screen games, especially PC games on Steam, have such a feature. This is an example of just a downloadable game that I played a little while back. This is a very, very simple screen, but I could imagine having, you know, you could across right below the actual title image there in the screenshot, you know, you can have like a general sound, video, control, VR. You could have different tabs, and then you could, you know, you could set those settings in advance of actually running the VR application. Difficulty settings or customizations. This also can be very helpful. So some of these tie together, things like lessening or limiting time limits in activities. So somebody might be able to complete a task, but they may not be able to do it in a strict time limit. So providing more time options or eliminating the time limit altogether. Especially in action games, this can tie into a couple of the other things, like, you know, maybe taking less damage, or, you know, more time to locate enemies. Like I'm in an action game and I can't figure out where the heck I'm getting hit from because there's some sniper way off in the distance and I can't see where it is. But if I don't take as much damage, or, you know, kind of different difficulty settings like that, I might be able to survive a little bit longer. Eliminate QTE or QuickTime events. Nobody really likes these anymore. These are those little button prompts that come up in a lot of games where you either have to mash a button repeatedly, or you have to enter a button sequence, A, B, X, Y, or, you know, it's just something just out of the blue. And some people can't, the time limits on these are really tight usually. So a lot of people, you know, this is a barrier. I've heard many people say, I literally can't progress anymore in this title because I can't get past these QuickTime events. And, you know, even I hear this even from regular like games journalists, they don't even like QuickTime events, so they can go away. Another thing that's really helpful is maybe offering some cheat codes in a game. Remember in the 80s and 90s, prior to microtransactions and all that kind of stuff, like you could actually enter cheat codes. And, you know, you could give yourself, you know, invincibility, you know, or more health, or, you know, more ammo, or just manipulate the game in some way. Yeah, it's kind of fun for some users, but, and actually it's a nice accessibility feature, because let's say, you know, a lot of titles or experiences are really, they want to experience the story, but they can't do it because the actions in the game or the experience are too difficult. So if you had some of these options and cheat codes in there, then they could experience, enjoy the experience just like everybody else. Future of VR. So this is kind of where things are going probably in the next couple of years. There's going to be more focus on mobile and standalone headsets. And this is because, again, these are probably some of the more lower cost options. And VR is kind of a niche technology as it is, just because of some of the barriers like cost and things like that. So if you can get somebody, you know, a bunch of people using the technology with the smartphone that they already have, or cheaply, more people are going to buy into virtual reality. Standalone technology, similar thing. More focus on social interaction. People kind of think that it's a solitary thing, but it totally isn't, especially once you get more people using the technology. There's some really great potential for social experiences for people. One disadvantage to some of this standalone and mobile technology, though, is that, as I said before, some of the mobile technology right now doesn't have head tracking, so it makes it really difficult to see some things or read text. When I'm using something like the Oculus Rift, whatever I'm looking at in the headset actually gets mirrored to my computer screen. So if I'm really having trouble seeing something, it's really clunky and not very efficient, but it is doable. I can kind of lift up my headset just a little bit over my forehead, look at my flat computer monitor, maybe even turn Windows Magnifier on or something for a brief minute, and try to see some of the text on the flat screen because it might appear closer or larger, which it sometimes does. Like I said, it's clunky, but it's something to fall back on. Mobile and standalone VR may not have that option, so it's really important to have, a lot of these accessibility things. Augmented reality is also going to be a big deal in the future. Apple's pushing into it. Google is. Microsoft is working on it. So there's a lot of different things, like I said, with the success of Pokemon Go and iOS 11 and their augmented reality stuff, that stuff is also going to be probably pretty prevalent in the next couple of years. The other thing is, like I said, with this, I kind of put a side note here. It's really critical to include, clear text and UI, make sure it's large enough, make sure that it's readable, head tracking when possible, because if you don't have, like I said, if you don't have that backup, you may not be able to use a lot more of experiences in some of these mobile apps. And I also added, I would really, really love to see like more text-to-speech support in not just apps themselves, but the actual platforms like Steam VR, Oculus Home, or Oculus Dash, which is what it's going to be called next spring because they're updating it. PlayStation VR, or whatever Microsoft and other developers are doing. A couple of years ago, I would have said, that would be a great wish, but it's never going to happen. But in the last couple of years, look at what Microsoft has done with their Xbox One and Windows 10. Even if I was a totally blind user, I can fully navigate the Xbox One dashboard. I can buy games, do parental controls, messages, basically navigate some of the video apps. I mean, I can navigate pretty much most of the dashboard independently with text-to-speech with narrator built in. So, and they're working on actually having text-to-speech APIs that developers of games can plug into eventually, that maybe menus in games will speak, or text in a game will speak in the next few years. So I would really love to see this happen in the virtual reality area as well, for Oculus and Steam and all this stuff. Quick summary, kind of just what I put in the earlier slide. But these are some of the things that I think are the most important that I've found as a low vision VR user, to include head tracking from start to finish, start to close of an app. Not just some places and, in the experience, or not in menus, that kind of thing. Just include it everywhere, please. It's very helpful. Also include a recenter view button, especially in motion control titles, because not many have that right now, if any. Include multiple movement options, movement and head movement options. Like I was talking about the teleportation and free movement, or, snap versus free head movement, controller movement. Use large clear text in UI elements, have good contrast between text or UI and the environment. environment or background. Adding an option to have crosshairs in menus or shooting experiences is really helpful. Adding an option screen outside, an option/configuration screen outside of the virtual reality app, it could be a very, very helpful thing for everybody, but especially people with low vision or other disabilities. It could be very, very helpful. Include multiple difficulty and gameplay customization settings. You know, difficulties, limiting QTEs, QuickTime events, all those types of things. Maybe some cheat codes again. That'd be cool. So those are just, like I said, some of the summaries. I know I breezed through this stuff really fast. We have a limited amount of time. Believe me, I could talk about this stuff. I'm really interested in VR. Like I said, there's not a lot of, there's standards really haven't been developed yet. So that's why I'm really trying to push hard to get developers and platform holders like Oculus interested in accessibility so that that can be part of the standards that inevitably get developed. I do have a YouTube channel, and that's where the whole illegally sighted thing came from. The channel is called Illegally Sighted. Little spin on legally blind there is what it is. But yeah, I cover, you know, games and technology, and the last year or two, virtual reality. I do have a playlist, or a few playlists, one specifically on VR accessibility, where I demonstrate a lot of these concepts and a lot of these accessibility features in more detail using specific games and apps. So there's that out there. Please feel free to share it with developers if you know any, or platform holders. I'd be definitely interested in working with people on that. And then I have a couple of playlists also just where I take a look at VR games or VR experiences. So yeah, you can also follow me on Twitter, and my Twitter name is @BGFH79. Like I said, I could talk about this a lot longer, but I will wrap it up here and give you guys time for questions. Sorry if I breeze through things really, really quickly, but I wanted to make sure that I got through everything. So that'll about wrap it up. Anytime questions?
Great. Thanks, Jesse. That was awesome and perfect on timing as well. So no
Awesome.
worries about breezing through anything.
Yeah, that was...
We did have... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to add my 2 cents. That was fantastic. That was a lot of fun. I've seen more comments about the Konami code on Twitter in the last few minutes.
Nice.
Because you mentioned cheat modes or cheat codes, and it immediately made me think of when I used to play Contra back on my first Nintendo system.
Oh yeah, but now everything is a microtransaction, and you can buy it.
Well, that's great.
Buy that ability.
Oh, I'm a sucker for that stuff too, because all I have to do is hold my thumb there for an extra second, and now it's mine.
Yeah.
But yeah, that, and then God mode on Doom. Oh yeah,
I still play Doom on a regular basis.
I love it. I am not a disabled gamer, but I'm a 45-year-old gamer, so that alone, it's sometimes
brutal Doom, baby. That's where it's at.
Yeah,
my avatar is actually the Doom guy. So
fantastic.
I love Doom.
So before I lose you two entirely to this,
exactly.
I'm going to bring it back. We had a brilliantly thought-provoking comment from Mandy Matz, who is also our winner of this hour's 90-day JAWS license. And Mandy's thought was this: does there need to be greater accessibility in the hardware devices that people use for VR themselves? She says they require a considerable amount of dexterity to kind of put together, attached to your phone, whatever it may be. And, she rather good humoredly says that she doesn't have the 3 hands required to do it.
Right. No, absolutely.
That's
there have been other presentations on VR accessibility, more specifically on like physical, being able to physically manipulate the controls and things. I wish I could remember who did it. It was a presentation, I want to say either at GA Conf last year, or it might have been Game Developers Conference or CSUN. But if you look up like VR accessibility on YouTube, you'll probably find that I want to say it might have been actually a GDC thing, a game developer conference thing, where he talked a lot more about that, not so much low vision, but a lot of that detail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's the part that sort of often gets overlooked. I think in accessibility is we tend to focus on the accessibility of the thing we're consuming and even the platform we're consuming it on, but not necessarily the process you have to go through to get that platform set up, enabled, put together, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's where it's really helpful. Again, having those options screen ahead of even launching the VR app could be really helpful, because I could use my assistive technology, whatever it happens to be, to configure that. And then once I get into, and that could include button remapping, so that, if I do have dexterity issues trying to use it, I can actually kind of, set things up to work differently from the start. And so once I launch the VR app, boom, I'm able to use it right away and not fuss with the VR interface just to make it work.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree.
Any other questions?
I don't see any other questions. I love that you actually gave a shout out to our friends from last year. We had one of the designers from Xbox was on, and he just sort of ran through some of the accessibility features there. So I love that you called that out again.
Yes, it's fantastic. Believe me, being able to mirror the Xbox to Windows 10 and actually like use narrator is just super helpful. I love it.
Yeah, they've been doing some great work there. Jesse,
what are your thoughts on using neural networks and the sort of AI field of research in terms of VR? And I'm specifically thinking about something I give a lot of thought to as a blind person, is how we make VR spaces accessible to someone who can't see at all. And my best idea at the moment is that we plug in some of these neural driven AI systems and get some kind of real-time description stuff going on.
Actually, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that is an oversight from, I had enough to cover in the presentation as it was, but one thing I forgot to mention is, one thing again that gets overlooked. Everyone's like, oh, the pretty colors, the visuals. But one thing that's really helpful, like VR is really immersive, both visually and audibly. People are working on a lot more trying to do like virtual surround sound or binaural audio. Like the Oculus Rift has built-in headphones, and they actually sound pretty good. And especially, like I said, if you get like a horror experience in there, man, you can't
Thanks.
your head. You're still in the experience, and it's kind of crazy. But like, if you have binaural audio and if you have great audio design, that could be, because then a totally blind user could actually physically move around, or they could use the controller, but they would also hear what's in the environment too. Again, you're going to need things like text-to-speech support for navigation, like menus or things to get around. But the experience itself, especially once they really get better with like binaural audio and things like that, we're very much looking forward to that.
Yeah, and I mean that's a really great point, right? And I wonder if we're falling into the same trappings with VR that we did with the web when it first came around. In that, when the web first rolled around, it was came about, it was this inherently visual sort of experience. And over time, we've started realizing, okay, the web doesn't just have to be about looking at a screen, right? And virtual reality is the same way. Like all we're doing is creating a virtual environment. So I mean, if somebody's not used to seeing something, it doesn't matter. We're still changing that environment for them.
Oh yeah.
To provide a new experience, right? So maybe we rely too much on the visual.
Right. Exactly. And I mean, I've played with there are some apps like there's a one called Virtual Desktop that actually you can basically make virtual monitor or monitors, and you can be like basically you're in this like big matrix thing. You got screens all around you, and you can like use Windows Magnifier if you wanted to, and it's just this like ginormous sense experience, and you get your screen reader going. It's kind of crazy, but yeah, so I mean, even that kind of thing can work. It's kind of starting to.
I think this is definitely one of those areas we're going to hear more and more about in all regards, but especially in terms of accessibility. It's a great area to be in right now, I think.
Definitely, and I'm interested in both VR and augmented reality. So I'm a nerd. I have to be in all these things. I have to know that. I have to know.
Sounds good to me. Well, we should probably just give another quick shout out to everybody who is participating and streaming ID24 from around the world. If you are listening in or watching, please tweet the ID24 hashtag. Let us know where in the world you are. It's always good to hear. We've had a few people letting us know they're in Memphis and Buffalo, and some in Australia, some in Britain. So it's good to get a sense of where everybody's tuned in from. Also, a quick shout out to our supporters, Barclays Access and the Centre for Inclusive Design, both of whom who've helped us tremendously in get this event up and running for November 2017. Billy, anything else?
Well, I mean, obviously, we would like to thank Jesse Anderson again for his time. That was a fantastic talk.
Really.
In case she missed it, Mandy Matz has been was our winner of the 90-day JAWS license for this hour, so we will be in touch. The hashtag, her Twitter handle is Mandy is tired, so there's a chance she might not be awake to hear this, but we'll reach out on Twitter just in case. And once again, if you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our channel. We would love to stay in touch, and also, of course, subscribe to Jesse's channel. Why not? It sounds like he's got some fantastic. He'll probably see me subscribing later on.
Awesome.
Other than that, Jesse, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see everybody back here at the top of the hour.
All right. Thanks.
See you then.
Bye now.